Lena, welcome back to the podcast. You're for season 2, my friend. You are my first repeat visitor, so welcome.
Thank you. I am so excited about that. What an honor.
Well, I
Thank
feel
you.
like we just didn't get to finish that conversation, and you were one of the most popular episodes that we had in season 1 because we're all obsessed with Narcissist, which is a reason to have you on. So let's recap a little bit about what we talked back in season 1 about. You specialize in working with narcissists, knowing when you're in a relationship with one and how to like survive that experience, right? Is that a good recap of you?
I would say mostly survivors of narcissistic
Yeah.
abuse. Yeah. Usually in the couples world, the real narcissists don't last too long.
Okay, so let's back
But
up
yes,
and do a
yeah,
recap. For those of
yeah.
us that don't know what a narcissist is, you gave such a lovely like explanation of it. So can you tell us again what in your view is what defines a narcissist?
Yes. And I always go to Dr. Craig Malkin, who wrote a great book called Rethinking Narcissism. And he uses a term called triple E, which stands for, well, empathy, lack of empathy, entitlement, and exploitation. So when I think of a narcissist, the first thing I think of is that low empathy, because it's the low empathy for other people and the extreme almost selfishness, but not self-absorbed. Self-absorbed is too mild, but this extreme selfishness where they put themselves above everybody else, but also have no empathy, no compassion for for any people in their life, really. There's no real attachment going on. And that's, at the severe end of the spectrum. So I also like to tell people that I think narcissism is on a spectrum, and that, the traits can be really severe, where you might have on the very high end of the spectrum narcissistic personality disorder, or you can have, people who have traits of the narcissism but don't necessarily qualify for the personality disorder.
So when you talk about that they're not self-absorbed, but they sort of think of themselves, and that's where it stops, this lack of empathy, do they, in your perspective, have a victimization of themselves happening, or is that like not part of their way they perceive themselves?
100%. Yeah, I think that's actually a real clue about when someone is really narcissistic, in addition to those aspects that I talked about, is that they always think that they're the victim, and they never apologize, and they never take accountability ever. So that, I think, is one real clue of when you're dealing with someone who's really narcissistic.
Which for some people listening might be confusing. And that's why I wanted to bring that up, because how does someone conceive someone who spends time feeling like they're being victimized, not take any responsibility for it, and simultaneously seem as if they're the most important person in the world, right? I mean, that is hard for some people who haven't had the experience of being in a relationship with a narcissist to see how those two concepts can like work together and show up in one person.
Yeah, that's true. And I think also the cruelty is probably another sign that we should mention about narcissism. Again, at its worst, there's a lot of real cruelty, gaslighting, which is the buzzword of our time right now. Like narcissism is a buzzword, so is gaslighting. But you have those real sort of emotionally manipulative and cruel behaviors. You're a Gottman therapist, the stonewalling is a real thing with the narcissist as well. I think the Gottman's 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse really relate to narcissism as well, when you have the contempt, the stonewalling. Not that when you're doing those things, that means you're a narcissist, but that may be part of the profile as well, with the no accountability, the no apology, the zero desire to change, which is why, therapy might be really hard for someone who's severely narcissistic, because they just don't think that they're the problem. They believe their partner is, and they want to sort of collude with the therapist and get the therapist on their side to say, hey, my partner's the problem, not me.
Yeah. What I think that you and I have both experienced is, for those that find themselves in our office, which, as you alluded to earlier, most narcissists don't go to therapy because they're not the problem, right? So
right, exactly.
I will bring you here. I'll even drive you and sit on the couch and point over at the therapist. But also what may happen is they're coming in and wanting to have the first crack at the therapist so that they can lay out the narrative, right? That they can like
Right.
paint the picture for you and let you know all the things that they've done that are very noble and giving from their perspective, and let you know all the reasons why their partner hasn't appreciated their efforts and why they really are just here to bring the other person here to work with you.
Yes. And they can be really, really charming as
Sure.
well. So a lot of people I know who have been in relationships with narcissists and went to therapy where it didn't go well tell me a lot of the time, well, he really charmed the therapist. And, she thought he was the best thing on earth. Like he knew how to smile at her and, talk a good game in the session. But I think another thing about narcissists is often they're behind closed doors is where you really see their true colors, and they're cruelest to people who they're closest to in relationships with. And so someone who may see them sort of on a shallow or superficial level is going to see them as someone who's just really charming. Even the ones who aren't as grandiose can still put on, this nice persona or wear a mask that's really convincing to other people that, hey, you're saying this person is cruel, but I'm not seeing any of that. And that can be actually like really the person who's being victimized and abused can feel really gaslit by the therapist sometimes when that happens.
And that's not to imply the person who we're identifying as a narcissist doesn't have emotions. And I think that, they definitely do about the situation and their view of what's happening to them. So that I think that can also be part of the conversation that maybe therapists or people that are in relationships get confused about, because narcissists have emotions for themselves and their situation, right? They can present with tears or like, worry or, remorse, right?
Yeah.
That it's more orchestrated to get it. My experience has been sometimes they're 5 steps ahead of me, that they have an outcome that they want me to get to. So they're laying the seeds and like bringing me like Hansel and Gretel to the outcome that they're looking for. And that might include showing me some tears or like some insight that they believe that I should resonate with, so that they're in fact trying to manage me.
Yes. And you're right. They do have emotions, and they also are good at something called cognitive empathy, which is that they can understand like how to play the role of empathy, but they're not necessarily feeling, empathy is sort of looking at another person and imagining what it might be like to be in their shoes and then feeling for them. You don't have to have gone through the same experience to have empathy for someone else. But a narcissistic person can also understand that concept and fake it or act like it. And so they can also appear sometimes to be empathic because they know how to, again, mask and mirror and charm people. And part of that is understanding that cognitive empathy.
So for those of you that did not listen to that podcast that Lena had with us, she gave some great tips on how to survive, what boundaries look like, when you should really think about how you're going to have an escape plan, what the consequences might look like. So we will put that link in the show notes so that anybody who didn't hear that, which I don't know why, because you should be listening to every single one of these podcasts, but whatever, you can listen to that. But today I wanted to bring you back on because we didn't even get to talk about your books. Yeah. So I want to share these books that you have. I want to dig into them. So one of the books that you've written is called Facebook Narcissist, right?
Yes.
Well, tell us, what is this book about?
This book is about what I call social media narcissism or digital narcissism. So how does narcissism show up on social media, and what is it doing to us culturally as a society? The New York Times had a really interesting piece just yesterday morning about some real hard evidence that social media is impacting the mental health of teens, and especially teen girls. And I correlate this in my book as part of that is this pressure of this me societal narcissism, which is not just vanity, but how the technology kind of takes away some of our empathy when we're behind screens and we're sort of losing connection, and just this idea of having to keep up with the Joneses, this sort of, Kardashian culture of photoshopping and having to look a certain way and the pressures of that. And it sort of looks at how we've come away from putting importance, on relationships and values and doing good for others. And so it was just a book really examining all aspects from racism and politics on Twitter and narcissism to cyberbullying and cyber stalking, which is a huge issue. And it's correlated with narcissists as well when you look at lack of empathy and things like that. And there's a lot of scientific research to back it up. I look at influencer culture. I look at what does it mean when someone puts a false narrative on social media, and what does that do to people who are constantly comparing themselves, and addiction, and what we're seeing with the wellness industry, and perpetuating misinformation and MLMs, multi-level marketing. I mean, it's got everything in it. So there's a lot there.
If I'm in a relationship with someone who's not only addicted to their cell phone technology, because I don't know anybody who's not anymore, right? It's our permission to check out. But I'm also in a relationship with someone who could meet some of this criteria as a Facebook narcissist. How do I approach this person? Because I imagine if they're fully in their addiction, they're not going to be like, you're right, let me set that down. I need to work on myself. Like, how do I approach that person so that they hear it in the right way?
Yes. And I have actually a chapter on relationship rifts and narcissism. And there is some actual research out there that shows that somebody being on their phone all the time can elicit a lot of jealousy from their partner. And there's also the component you talked about when someone's addicted to their phone or they're distracted and they don't put it down. And so you asked how to approach them.
Yeah.
So of course, whenever we want to approach somebody about a concern, from an Imago perspective, we don't want to make it a problem with them necessarily where we're going to put them on the defensive. So you sort of make it about how it's making you feel, the behavior, how it's making you feel, not that there's something wrong with the person. And I was sort of talking about this with a friend the other day when, her husband had a concern, but he framed it to her as you have a problem.
Oh.
And, and I told her, well, yeah, that's going to put you on the defensive when somebody.
There's nowhere to go other than I must defend my character with the person I love the most. Yes.
Right. Exactly. So, it might look like, hey, I've been feeling out of touch or disconnected from you lately. I think part of it is when you're on your phone, is this something, are you open to talking about this now? And, sort of come at it from a place of vulnerability and how it's making you feel, which is usually, again, disconnected, out of touch, invisible, and just sort of naming your feelings around it. And, if your partner is receptive to that and compassionate to that, you can sort of brainstorm, I think, a few ways to be like, hey, when we're having quality time together, can you keep your phone, at locked up or somewhere else? I talk about this a lot with people with children too, as how I think dinner time or meal times are a sacred place where we don't have technology. Like that's one place where you can have a boundary around it. So in a relationship, I would look for, again, places you can put boundaries around that, where you're not asking the person to give this up, but just to be more mindful about it when they're with you.
I love what you said, because that sort of encapsulates why it's so important to ask for your need versus criticize the behavior, right? Because what I heard you say was, hey, I'm not feeling okay, so I want to put you on notice by naming my emotion that something's not right with me. Not so that you get on the defensive, but so that it brings to your attention, hey, we're not okay, because if one of us is not okay, then both of us are not okay. And here's specifically the behavior that you're doing that's causing me distress versus me attack your character. Right? So you set that up. And then what is it that I would look to resolve it with? Because if I don't ask for my need, then it just falls like criticism. And then my partner's going to go off offering all these different options or telling you why they're wrong because they don't know how to fix your feelings or getting it wrong. And so I love that it's so clear that, like, hey, name the emotion, talk about what it's doing to you so that the other person is less likely to get defensive. And then what would you like them to consider doing moving forward?
Yes. And that's sort of exactly how, the layout is when you're doing therapy with a couple, at least, from my Imago training, is that I ask the person when they're sharing we call it a frustration or a concern, that they're talking about the behavior. So when this happened, I felt like this. And so it's not criticizing the person, it's sharing something about your experience about it.
So you're mentioning Imago, which I think you may be the first or second Imago therapist that I've had on the practice. So for those of us that are not therapists that are listening, they're like, what is this Imago you speak of? What is it that you're referring to? Tell them about the theory, because it's a great one.
Yeah, so Imago relationship therapy was founded by Dr. Harville Hendricks and his wife, Helen LaKelly Hunt. And the word Imago is Latin and it means image. And so the idea is that when we're children, no matter how ideal our childhood was, we all get wounded at some point. We all have unmet needs from childhood. No matter how great our caregivers were, they were not perfect, right? And so we grow up and we have sort of these unmet needs, or we push down parts of ourselves that we feel are shameful, and we adapt to those. And so what's happening is that the Imago theory is that when we're older and we're looking for romantic love, we're subconsciously drawn to people who sort of remind us of the worst and best parts of these primary caregivers. And what we're trying to do is sort of a reenactment with them, that trying to get those unmet needs from childhood met through our partner. And when they disappoint us, it's also triggering back all that childhood wounding. And so I like to tell my clients that I also think about it as in the trauma world, they have the 90-10 reaction, where 10% is something that happens in the present, but some of the emotions that you feel, 90% are the emotions flooding from the past, or past traumas or woundings, or whatever you want to call it. So sometimes I'll say, hey, that thing that your partner said to you, it wasn't just about your partner, right? It's about what's that feeling? What's that unmet need? And it's really interesting because it's just a dynamic that plays out with almost every couple that I see. It's always about the core unmet needs. Yeah. And so we sort of work with couples, one, to untangle and unpack what those unmet needs are. And Harville Hendricks' famous book is called Getting the Love You Want, is that when we fight, when we're in conflict with our partners, we're trying desperately just to get those needs met, but we're doing it in a very maladaptive way a lot of the time, because nobody teaches us how to be in relationships. I always say, why don't we have relationship class in school growing up, right? Communication, conflict resolution, relational just knowledge. And so a lot of the times we think that, by using these tactics of, I'm going to get really angry at my partner and then they're going to pay attention to me. And sometimes that's maladaptive from childhood, right? Is that I had to scream and shout to get somebody to see me. And so I'm going to reenact that with my partner. So instead we teach them there's a different way to get the love that you want from your partner. And one of the ways is, that structured dialogue, which I talked about with you, is teaching them how to reframe concerns and frustrations, teaching them what's coming up for them, going back into the childhood stuff. There's a lot of that. And we also are very, most of us are purist in the sense that we're very strict about safe dialogue. And so that means we have a very structured way of having our couples speak to each other. And so we always have one person who's the sender and one as the receiver. And when the sender speaks, the receiver has to mirror everything they say. And so it doesn't mean that they have to parrot it exactly word for word, but they have to ask their partner after they've mirrored, did I get that? And if the partner says, yeah, you did, okay, then they can carry on. Or if they say, no, this is what I really want you to get. So we kind of keep having them mirror. And that's just a really effective way of keeping things calm and safe, because, when we're in normal interactions with people, sometimes we just want to interrupt. We want to defend ourselves. In the Imago process, it kind of forces you to stay present with your partner and really be forced to listen to them and take in what they're hearing. And then we actually have them validate and empathize and cross the bridge. That's what I like to say, cross the bridge into their partner's world to try and get what it's like for them. So that's a real quick crash course.
No, that's a beautiful. I love that. I love the capsule size version of something that I admire. I admire a lot about what the Imago method says. And so if we circle back then to narcissists, and this lack of empathy, and it's such a tenet of good couples therapy. How are you navigating that? Like, that must be incredibly difficult.
I think, most people that they come into couples therapy, they really want their relationship to work. And a lot of them really try very hard. Now, there's a few instances, there's this one story from many years ago where I had a man who was clearly, I saw them one time, so I can't diagnose him, but he just wanted to criticize his wife and nitpick for the tiniest little things, like to the point of, you didn't clean the dishes the way I was, like spotless. It was like this list of all these grievances, really petty grievances. You could tell he wanted to make her feel bad. And she just sat there crying not the whole session, because I didn't let it go on. Right. And I just stopped him and I turned to him and I said, if we're going to do this process, one of the things I need you to do is really try to have empathy for your wife. And he turned to me, total blank stare, and said, I have no empathy for my wife.
Yikes.
Yeah, literally in front of her.
Oh, and I must have broke her heart. Wow.
Yeah. And I said, well, if you want to continue to do this work, you're going to have to try to find some empathy for your wife. And they never came back, and I didn't expect them to. But again, that's when it's really, really hard. And that's when, again, my hope for her is that she would find individual therapy, because it was just really abusive to watch, to the point where I had to stop it and say, I can't work like this. I cannot sit here and listen to you berate this poor woman while she just sobs. This is not couples therapy.
You just brought up something that may feel like a tangent, but I feel like inspired to talk about it as you said it. Are we a generation that is losing the art of empathy? I mean, as we're talking about the Facebook narcissist, right? And there's this the visual I have is somebody sitting in their mom's basement, like sending an angry message to a reality TV star that they didn't like, who did something, right?
Yeah.
Is there an inability to put yourself in people's shoes anymore because we are spending so much screen time? And is that feeding into something that's already possibly there as a personality disorder, but we don't value empathy as a society anymore? So our parents are not enforcing it. Society's not enforcing it. Unless we're going to a great Imago therapist like you, we're not getting experience of it. Is that part of what's going on?
I would say yes and no, because, I really looked into a lot of the research on this when I was writing the book. And, there's some parts where they'll say, social media is not all bad. You have now this, TikTok, for better or worse. There is some normalization and empathy around mental health, and young people being able to speak openly about that. I think we are a more open and compassionate society than we've ever been in terms, we're definitely nowhere where we need to be, but in terms of acceptance of differences, I see with the younger generation a lot more empathy around that than, say, some of the older generations. And so I see that as pretty hopeful. But again, I do think the online aspect of it, and anonymity online. So somebody who's just a screen name, again, can be so abusive. We have people who are committing suicide because of online abuse. And I do think, again, that's a problem when you can't see somebody and someone's facial expressions, or when it's just so easy to lob off an insult at someone anonymously. I do think that erodes our empathy. And I do think that's a problem. And I do think, especially, I wrote this book in the pandemic where everybody was online and social distancing. And it really drove home the idea that in-person connection is at the heart of learning empathy. And so I think that that's really important, that we continue to foster, what our life looks like offline more so than online. Not that online and tech can't be a part of our lives. And I don't advocate, like I say, for a mass exodus of social media. But I think the book is more like, how do we use this mindfully, and how do we use this as responsible and compassionate digital citizens?
And to sort of support your point, I noticed that even as we're talking on Zoom, like all of us that talk on Zoom, they're not even set up so that we can actually have like appropriate eye contact. And we have this little
Mhm.
pesky like version of ourself in the bottom the whole time. And you can't help but like, is my hair out of place? Am I looking like I like care enough? Right. And so it's even setting up some of that narcissism in
Yeah.
the other social media that we use, right? I mean, that just
Yeah.
occurred to me like it's a perfect breeding ground for us to sort of be self-obsessed.
Yeah, well, my friend actually sent me a meme about that yesterday of like someone's primping and preeming me on my Zoom call, like because we're looking at ourselves and
Yeah.
becoming, and people, again, I filtered my image, I was like, oh, I can fix myself on this, and it's really, especially when you see so many other people doing it.
Yeah.
I will say there was this really interesting piece from the book that Norway's doing now. So I think it was 2021, Norway passed a law that anyone who is like an influencer or somebody with a public account, when they edit or Photoshop or filter an image of their body or their face, they have to label it as such. So, in the
Really?
US, if an influencer is paid by a company to advertise a product, they have to do hashtag ad or they have to say that they're being paid to do it. In Norway, they've changed the law where you actually have to say, I don't know how you do it, but you have
Right.
to say, I filtered this or this body image was Photoshopped. And
Hashtag I
that is
have
punishment.
cellulite in real life or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. And I never followed up to see how it was actually implemented, but they said the punishment was by fine or could be imprisonment even. And so they said the reason that they were making that law was because the mental health crisis among Norwegian teen girls was so massive that they needed to do something about this. And they actually really tied social media because there's been a huge rise in body dysmorphia and things of that nature with social media. And again, it's such a problem for these young girls with their brains aren't even fully developed. They're having, going through teen years is so hard as a girl or a boy. And then you're constantly being bombarded with this is what you should look like. You have to have these duck lips and these tiny little waists. And the message that they're getting is that their value is also about who's liking it. And those, when we look at the brain too, the dopamine hits that we get from likes and validation on social media, it perpetuates that addiction to the self and the image.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, it's much deeper than we think at surface level. It's not just cruising through social media. We're actually getting messages implanted that
Yeah.
impact who we are down the road.
Yeah.
How does
And then
this?
again, there is a side that, again, I don't want to say it's all bad,
Right.
that people also can, when people use social media to connect relationally with people, that also can be really helpful. And so, that's something that I also want to point out that it's not all bad, and that some people do use it to connect, but just to put it out there that it's not black and white either.
How would you know if you had a narcissist that was contacting you on social media? Would you? Is there some telltale signs that as I'm having somebody slip something into my DM, I can have like a warning sign that they're a narcissist and I should stay clear?
I do have those tips in the book. Yeah, one of the things is the love bombing, which is again a classic narcissistic tale, and I have case studies in the book. So and they're all true stories that people have told to
So
me.
people who don't know what love bombing is, who aren't as cool as you,
Yeah.
what is love bombing? Because maybe they know what it is, but they don't know what it's called. What does that mean?
Over the top declarations of even obsession, affection, being enamored with you, but it's not. It's when somebody doesn't know you. So somebody doesn't know you well and they're like, wow, you're the best thing ever. And they're going over the top, sending you stuff. And it feels really good, right? It feels really good when somebody thinks like we're the queen of or king of the world. But the gestures are over the top. The person is they seem really certain about you without knowing you. I always say that's kind of a red flag. If someone wants to kind of commit you with it after the first date or says things like, oh, I see us spending the rest of my life together. okay, not everyone who does that is a narcissist. I do know people who met on the first date, and got married right away and lived happily ever after. But generally, the over flattery
Yeah.
and, just that over love bombing, just as you think of it, just like being
And they
bombed
seem
with
to have
love.
like an antenna for anything that you feel insecure about, right? I don't know what that
Yes.
is, but so many of my clients, they'll come in and they're like, well, they've never really wanted to be in a relationship with anybody before. And now they say that I'm the person that's making them change their mind. And we don't question that, right?
Oh,
We
yeah,
don't say like,
exactly.
well, maybe they just want a partner and it doesn't really matter because you were available. Not that you're not delightful, but they don't know
Yes.
you. So how could they have made that choice and you don't know them? So how could you vet them that they're actually who they say they are?
I couldn't have said it better. I could not have said it better. Yeah. And it's like, again, it doesn't mean that you're not great and you're not wonderful,
Yeah.
but you need to get to know somebody. And, I think that over the top stuff can often be, again, a form of manipulation to try to, and what happens with a narcissistic person is once they feel that they win you over, this is when the criticism and the emotional and mental and sometimes physical abuse comes into play, is when they sort of have got you hooked.
Yeah.
And then, the mask comes off. And maybe at first it only comes off. And I speak from experience. So I always tell people I was in a relationship with a narcissist. So this is what drew me to this work and, trying to protect and help people who have suffered through this type of abuse. The mask, it just comes off,
Yeah.
5 minutes maybe. You get a slip of it and you're like, whoa, that was weird. But then they're nice and charming again.
Because
there's
this rush to get you to commit, I notice with my clients. It's like, oh, they want us to move in together. I know we've only known each other a week, but like this is different for them, right? And you take
and there's some
yourself
obsession.
out of it.
Yeah. And there's some controlling nature to it. So it may seem like, oh, they really love you, but oh yeah, you're going to hang out with your friends over me tonight. It's, it sort of slowly starts like that with, some jealousy issues. And again, at first, for some people, it can seem really flattering. Yeah. They want to spend all their time with me. They want to move in with me right away. They want to, they don't want me to see my friends because they hate to be away from me for 10 minutes. But that's actually control.
So how would I set healthy boundaries? Because this always is going to have to come back to some kind of therapeutic way of dealing with it, right? So what would be my healthy boundaries that I would set with someone that seems to have these behaviors? I don't know because I don't know them well enough, but what is it that I should do to ensure my own mental health?
I would just say, hey, I if you like the person, right, or that you do like them, you like spending time with them, but that you have a rule that you like to get to know somebody first before you get too committed. And so I also tell people, like, why do we need to get to know somebody? We need to see how they are in multiple situations. And there's nothing wrong with that, So if I would just say, hey, I'm and keeping those commitments to your friends and your plans, not giving up so much of your life for one person that you don't know very well. And, that could be even someone you've known for 6 months. And so again, making sure you don't lose yourself too much in a relationship is also a really good way, I think, to keep healthy boundaries around just your self-preservation.
Yeah, great. I am so grateful that you were willing to come on a second time. Again, you have so much advice and it's delivered with such a lovely, compassionate, non-judgmental, hey, I've been there with you. Let me walk the road with you. And I love this idea about Facebook because I hadn't really thought about it this way, and that it is a place for us to start recognizing some small strides that we can take so that we're more aware of what good mental health looks like and what relationships can have as a breeding ground for their dysfunction from the very beginning, right? And so I love this introduction of this. So thank you so much for coming back on, Lena. This is important.
And I'm always so grateful. Thank you for having me a second time.
You're very welcome, my friend. I hope we'll have it again soon.
Yes, thank you so much.
Take good care. Thanks for tuning into the D-Spot. Find me, Dr. Dana McNeil, and my guests on social media using the links down below. Subscribe for new episodes weekly and leave a comment letting us know how and if you can relate or what topics you'd like us to cover next. See you next time, and don't forget, going to therapy is cool.